On today's episode of Feel No Shame, we speak to George Thomas. George is currently living in Australia, having grown up in England, and talked to us about his experience of mental distress and how he used fitness and physical activity as a way to deal with the deepest, darkest thoughts. He also talks to us about emigration and how hard it can sometimes be to be away from his main support bubble in the UK, and how he copes in Australia with anxiety. George has just finished a PhD in physical activity and mental health and is passionate about education as well as research in physical activity. George speaks to us frankly and openly, and we thank him for his time. Enjoy the episode.
Well, hello, George. How are you? You're in Australia.
Absolutely. It's very early in the morning in Australia, 6 o'clock in the morning. So I've had a coffee. I've had 2 coffees actually already. It's kind of bad, isn't it? I'm kind of here rattling, but I've needed it this morning.
6 in the morning.
That's good. It'll be a really energetic caffeine.
It's going to be
podcast.
buzzing, I reckon. That's it. Yeah, 6 in the morning. Time travel.
Wow.
We're at opposite ends of the hot drink spectrum. You're on coffee. I'm on lemon and ginger. So I'm ready to go to bed. And you're just starting. We haven't got you up deliberately for this, have you? You said you're an early bird.
Absolutely. I am an early bird, but no, absolutely.
Wow.
Good.
Thank you for waking up.
6 o'clock is another level.
You're absolutely welcome. It's good to be here.
Brilliant. I think the main reason that you're on is off the back of your sister Holly from episode 2. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, but it was the follow-on from her conversation with us about the suicidal thoughts and so on. But we're going to be talking a little bit about we're going to elaborate on what your sister talked about, but from your point of view, George, it's the use of feeling good with exercise, having the positivity through that. So just straight away from me, but what made you get to that point of thinking, okay, I need to do something different about myself, I need to change my outlook? What was that catalyst?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very long and challenging journey for me. It's something which I probably struggled most. We talk about health as this kind of holistic aspect, and it is. There's so many parts and entities to health, and I think when it comes to mental health, it's probably the biggest aspect I've struggled with, and something I've taken a long time to figure out what I need to do, how I need to change my outlook, what support I need around me. So it was really a long and challenging road to get to that point. And I think for me, a big part of it was coming to Australia and, coming away from kind of everything I knew. And, that was a fantastic period of my life where I thought, let's do this. This is great. This is a new chapter. But equally, it came with a lot of downfalls. And whilst my kind of journey with mental illness started much before that, this was really kind of a catalyst to where I thought, right, I need to change a few things in my life. So really part of the decision to come out here was to kind of to have that, to have a lifestyle which was conducive to my mental health and conducive to the way I lived. For me, lifestyle is incredibly important. So to be in a place where I can have sun, 80% of my time, as opposed to the UK, it's a really, really big thing. And I'm a massive fan about, what we can do, what parts or what components can we bring into our life, which is going to help our mental health. And a big believer that is a holistic approach. So, sleep, having enough sun, doing enough physical activity, eating well. And whilst not one of those things alone can achieve much, but all of those things together can really make a difference. And for me, that was really what changed my outlook on life and what kind of pursued my dream to learn more about it. And that's why I took on this PhD around physical activity and health.
I remember considering emigrating out to Australia a little while back, but it was also whilst I was in a pretty bad way mentally, and I was always concerned that I would tell people I'm considering emigrating to Australia, and they'd feel like it was a delusion or feel like I was losing it by saying to everybody, well, this is what's going to help me. I'm going to move halfway across the world and leave you all behind. See you later.
Yeah.
I imagine for you it was more of a, I mean, I wasn't delusional. I kind of thought the same things as you. Australia looks beautiful. I'm considering New Zealand now, actually, by the way, but that's on the
Me
down
too.
low. That's like
Me too.
That's like a 1% chance, but I mean, why not? But for you, it must have been a really well thought out decision. It was something that you thought about for quite a long time before. Did your research on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm incredibly lucky to have a fantastic family support around me. I've always said it from the start. You've met Holly, and I'm sure you got the impression that she is incredibly kind, very caring, and a
Mm.
support that is there for me, and that is, a really lucky thing for me to have. So it was a tough decision, and it was something I deliberated on for a long, long time. So for me, it was more about creating an environment where I might not have had that family aspect directly around me, but I had a lot of the other things which I necessarily didn't have in the UK. And as I've mentioned before, a lot of those things were lifestyle-based factors. But it was an incredibly hard decision. For me, my family network is one of the biggest supports that I do have. So trying to kind of negotiate that whilst I've been here has been quite tricky. To do that, with the time difference, as we guys know now, it's quite tricky to talk to each other and find a good hour where you can really get deep and talk about what's going on. And unfortunately, more often than not, I've kind of got into the habit where it's been a bit of small talk, and I need to really just tell myself sometimes, look, it's really important for you to dedicate some times in your week to catch up and call home, because those guys are the biggest support network for me. And I'm also very lucky that I've created an environment and I've built relationships here where they've also been supportive, and that's a big thing for me, is kind of creating new relationships, and whether that's with people or with sport, through sport and teams, or having a social network. It's a tricky one, and it's a really hard process, but that for me is probably the most important thing. It's just to create an environment which is conducive to my mental health.
And following on from the sport element,
Mm.
it, we had a quick chat before we started recording. Me being a Leeds fan, you being a Bristolian.
Unfortunately.
Bristol. Well, no, I mean, the Bristol City, even Leeds and Bristol had their their run-ins over the last few years. It was great seeing that. But do you see sport as an escapism to some extent, or does it fall hand in hand with your daily lifestyle routines?
Yeah, I do. I do see it as escapism. I see it as a very healthy distraction for me, particularly in the days where I do struggle. I think for me, it really just does take me away from that feeling of isolation, that feeling of kind of a low state of mind. And it brings me, not, we talk a lot about in research, we talk a lot about the physiological effects of exercise and sport, but we don't talk very much about just simply having the social element, having the ability to talk to somebody, and nothing about mental illness and nothing about mental health, but it's simply a distraction. And I think sport for me is a vehicle towards building new relationships. It's a vehicle towards talking about things which I might not necessarily have incredible expertise over. I spend my days doing a PhD. I talk very scientifically. I talk very evidence-based. So sometimes to have relationships with people that aren't in that area of expertise is quite nice, and it's a kind of distraction away from that. So yeah, I think it is an escapism to an extent. Um, but it's something which I've thoroughly enjoyed for all my life. So even before my battles with mental illness, I've always enjoyed sport. I've always enjoyed the element of competing. But I think in my later years, in at least my relative later years, I've more enjoyed the social elements of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean on the pitch. It's outside of the pitch. It's in the changing rooms. It's going for a beer with your mates after a game. And for me, that's probably one of the most important aspects for me currently. Just because simply, it's a chance to talk. It's a chance to speak up. It's a chance to kind of release a few things that are going on. And I think I'm very lucky where I'm quite an open book, and I'm quite happy to talk about those things. And some people might be a little bit more hesitant. But again, I've been very lucky to form a couple quite close friendships here, and had the chance to open up and had the chance to kind of, to be a little bit more vulnerable. And I think that's important. And to think that sport has given me that platform is quite interesting, because not many people might think that that platform would provide that. So yeah, escapism, but I thoroughly enjoyed it throughout my years.
Yeah, I can massively relate to that. I started playing football again maybe 2 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago in October. So 1.5 years ago, having not played for years and years. And it was as a result of, again, being in a really bad way and trying to use a concept called opposite action, where you feel something instinctively. So if Al says to me, what do you want, a tea or coffee? Instinctively, if I think, well, I always have a coffee, so I'll say coffee. Opposite action would suggest that I say tea, as a way of just breaking that pattern. And so I didn't play football for ages. I saw this message on a Facebook group that just said, we're a group of local men who play football pretty casually. Does anyone want to join? And my instinctive reaction to that was no. Why would I want to go and hang out with a load of random men and play football? I haven't done it for years. So then opposite action, I was in a really bad way, and I thought maybe that means I should. So I turned up, and it would have been after like a week of criticizing myself and feeling like I was terrible for all these kind of reasons. And then suddenly I'm receiving praise for what I'm doing. I'm not thinking too much about what I'm doing because it's pretty instinctive when I'm on the pitch. So suddenly I'm not overthinking, I'm not criticizing, I'm getting praise, and everything starts falling into place as a result of that. So I turn up some days suicidal and end up finishing the game feeling like, wow, this
Yeah.
is worth living. This life is worth living. And it was all just kicking a little ball around with a load of men that I didn't know. And a bit like you, I've started to form some friendships. I've got extra people I can talk to if I want to, but equally, I can turn up and not talk to anyone and just play. And I
Yeah.
think it's really good to have that option.
Yeah.
But you mentioned you've been into sport your whole life as well. Is there anything that you would consider to be your big passion or something that you feel better at than anything else, or are you a bit of an all-rounder?
Yeah, you know what, it's funny how it works, because football for me, or mainly football, I mean, I've always been into sport, but football for me was kind of when my first experience with mental illness happened. So I was very lucky to play quite competitive football when I was younger. I played for an academy, Bristol City Academy, for several years, from around the age of 6 up and towards 15. So for quite a while, I was traveling up and down the country with my old man, having the time of my life, playing teams like Chelsea and Villa and all these great teams. And, you know, I really wasn't having the time of my life. And one evening at training, I got released, and I wasn't told directly. My old man was told. And it was a case of going from training 4 or 5 times a week, playing games on a Sunday, traveling these fantastic grounds, to not having any of that. So football for me is a bit of a mixed bag. It can be a bit two sides of the coin. It has have some very fond memories, but also a time when I think it was the kind of the first moment where I felt this, you know, my heart and my everything just sink. And I think for me, where I didn't have that real explanation at that age, you know, you look at, I study a lot with adolescents, and you look at that age, you know, it's a time when you are very close to your peer networks. It's a time when you're very socially connected at school. You know, you're respected among your peers for playing, you know, this level of football. So you can imagine going into school for the next couple of weeks saying that, you know, unfortunately you've been released from this team. And, you know, this idea that you are identified as being a football player is taken away from you. So, you know, it's almost, you know, you feel like this table leg has been wiped out, and all of a sudden you're like Bambi on ice. You know, you really do struggle to identify with who you are. So I think for that time of my life, when I was 14, 15, was the first time I really did feel very vulnerable, incredibly vulnerable, very low. And I had a period of time, you know, for years where I just felt like I wasn't worth much. You know, that was all I knew. I didn't really go to parties. I didn't spend a lot of time going out and messing about with my mates. I just committed myself to playing football for all those years. So when that was taken away from me, I just felt this sense of loss. I felt this sense of just complete missing, emptiness. So, you know, you mentioned, you know, has it been a real passion of my life? And it has, but it's also been almost, you know, a real trigger of my life for a long time. And it took me a while to get back into playing. And it took me a while to realize that, well, you know, I've got to accept that I'm not going to be a professional player. And I need to kind of venture into other avenues of my life. So, yeah, I mean, it's something which, you know, having therapy and having some, you know, extensive counseling sessions, I've identified that time in my life is probably quite a key period of my life where my mental illness started to creep in, and quite quickly from that point.
It's huge, and it's the horrible sort of bargain that we all enter into with everything that we love, that if you're going to love something that intensely, then it's going to hurt when it's taken away. And you're very vulnerable at that age, but also, like you said, you identify as a footballer. That forms a big part of your narrative. and your purpose and how you see yourself. And so when someone comes in and takes your story and starts editing it and crossing out footballer and just leaving it with a big red question mark, I mean, at any age that's really disruptive, but at 15, whew, on one hand you've got the world at your feet, but on another you've had what you consider to be your world just taken away. Are you okay to talk about that age and how you felt, and
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
kind of on the table?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, as I say, it was the first kind of real experience, so I didn't really know how to feel. It was a real sense of loss. I didn't know who to speak to. I wasn't really that well vulnerable enough to open up even to my closest family members. I really did hide it well. It was kind of the time when I learned to wear this mask and say, yeah, I was fine, you know. And this was really the first time when I started to do this. And going into school, I remember going into school and, you know, just really not wanting anybody to ask me about football. Whereas, you know, the week before, I was everything about football. Ask me about my game on the weekend. You know, how did I play? What did I do? Did I score? And I remember going in the week after and thinking, football? No. Like, and then this, like, it was almost this real trigger point. And, you know, I would go into school and I would feel really paranoid that people were judging me for I saw it as a failure. I saw it as a failure that I got released from the academy. And, you know, it got to the point where I was so paranoid and so anxious, I started to distance myself and I started to take myself away from my friendship groups. And, you know, any invite I got to go away and do things, I would say no, because I'd be fearful that they would bring up the topic of football. And it really did negate my daily life. You know, I was going and living this fake life. You know, I was really just trying to avoid certain things. And, you know, at 15, 16, most 15, 16-year-olds, or at least from what I've found, is that they do struggle to open up. They don't really know how to. They don't really know, you know, what to do. They see it as a real kind of foreign currency, if you like. It's a hard one to get around. So for me, I did really struggle, and I think it's something where it has made me want to strive for other things in my life more and more and more. So if you ask you know, I talk a lot about, you know, what have I done to kind of compensate for football? And for me, it was education. So I kind of thought, right, you know, I got to the point I couldn't be a footballer, but I had to achieve something. I couldn't not kind of just stay in that mindset of, right, I didn't make it in football and then just staying on this line. I had to go and achieve other things in my life. And for me, that was education. And my granddad was a huge believer in education. Knowledge is power. And for me, he is, among other family members, of course, but my granddad was a huge pillar for me in terms of pulling me out of that kind of state of mind and realizing that there are other things in life that have value. And he did encourage education, and, you know, to go on now to submit my PhD and to finally go this way and in another avenue of my life is fantastic. But it can also be quite damaging because you're always achieving more. You always want to achieve more. You know, it's always what's next. And whilst it's incredibly fantastic that I've come here and I've done these great things, I've also need to manage my kind of expectations of what's next, because there has to be a time when you have to just be happy. You know, you have to be happy with what you've got, whether that's not football and whether that's with a PhD under your belt. You got to find this aura of you know, happiness, and it's something which I'm kind of dealing with at the moment. And, you know, it's these times of my life when I finish something are the most vulnerable times of my life, because I'm kind of stuck in this roundabout about what's next. You know, so for me, it's I'm currently dealing with that kind of negotiation in my mind about, right, George, think about what's going on, think about where you can go next, and, you know, just really kind of to handle these difficulties. And so yeah, it's tricky, and it's something which at that age I think stemmed a lot of it from, yeah, for sure.
I think it reads true with a lot of I mean, I'm not stereotyping, but a lot of men um, that that talk a lot about competition, that are involved in competition. You take Tyson Fury, for example, you know, as an international figure, and his mantra was before he went back into boxing, that he felt really alone at the top of the mountain after all he'd done. And then he just thought, right, okay, ballooned in weight and so on and so forth. But it's those pockets, as you've rightly mentioned, George, that what next? And
Yeah.
and it's that panic, and it's that, okay, is there a foundation? I can already tell you, you've got a foundation with that PhD, and it will be under your belt, and it will open other avenues for you. Um, I think my next question would be, the dealing of lockdown, especially in a foreign country.
Mm.
And yes, the PhD was. Were you studying during
Yeah.
during the first initial lockdown stage? Um, my question would be, how how has it been for that year, and comparing it to the UK and Australia, because I've seen, even because I follow Leeds United, obviously I'm seeing a lot of fans coming together in Australia still, and they're
Mm.
celebrating together in the bars, in the pubs, and so on and so forth. How has it been for you, dealing with lockdown in a foreign country? Try, just trying to get from A to B. What's it been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, relative to the UK, here in Australia, we have been incredibly lucky. Having spent a period of time back in the UK during the UK lockdown, I can see that we are very lucky here to have the ability just to simply have a little bit more autonomy about our daily lives, to be able to go out and still meet up with people and socialize with people. So it is quite difficult to compare. But I think for me in Australia, the first initial lockdown, it was very similar to the UK, where we it was a house lockdown, and we had to work from home, and a lot of those things were suddenly taken away from us here in Australia. And albeit it wasn't for a long period of time, I guess in Australia we experienced that for a shorter period of time. So for me, I think, yeah, I mean, look, the sport was taken away, the gyms were closed, the all the kind of the daily things that I put in place in my life and my environment were taken kind of away from me. So it was a bit of a, like for many people, it was a shock to the system. It was a, well, what do I do? It's almost habitual. My day-to-day life is very habitual. I do like routine, and when those things are kind of taken away, it was a struggle. And I think for me, more so than anything, I felt very isolated. Having my family back home and seeing what was happening back in the UK, and it happening at such a, an exponential rate, it was quite scary. And I did feel quite isolated, not only that I didn't have anyone here, but that I couldn't do anything for those back home. And I think for me, a couple years ago, I think for me it was the fear of not being able to get home if I needed to. So for me, a couple of years ago, my granddad, who I mentioned I'm very close to, I think for me the biggest fear was being away whilst there was issues going on with my granddad. There was an illness, and unfortunately he passed whilst I was here, and I wasn't able to actually make it back in time to say goodbye. And I think for me, with lockdown, that for me was kind of difficult, because I didn't want that to happen again. I didn't want an issue to arise with a friend, a family member, someone I really cared about, and for me not to get back home to say goodbye, or for me not to get back home to support them. So I think that was a huge fear for me, and it actually prompted me to come back home eventually to make sure that didn't happen again. I struggled with a lot of guilt after that moment with my granddad, after those times, and I think I just didn't want that to happen again. So whatever it took, I made sure, I just got home. So yeah, very isolating, very kind of unsure of what to do. And it was a really poor time mentally for me, with that first initial stage of lockdown. I was trying to balance a lot of things in my life, from relationships to a PhD to being away from family. And, I'm the first to admit that I didn't cope well. And I didn't have those daily things in my life that I relied on for so long out here. They were taken away. So I was very vulnerable. And I keep saying the word isolated, but it's true. I was very isolated. I felt incredibly lonely,
Yeah.
to be in a place where, although I've got friendships here, they're not quite, it takes a bit of time for you to be able to open up to people. And as I said, I've been very lucky in recent weeks since I've been back that I've managed to do that. But in the first lockdown here, I was very just on my own, and I didn't feel like I had that network here. So yeah, it isolated, I think, being the kind of summary word.
Yeah. I think I can relate really, as I've mentioned, with the first year at university. I've said that to Ro when we were talking about my
Mm.
situation. But yeah, really insightful, and I think it's so weird just seeing the sunrise behind you. Just that, and that's a metaphor for the
Yeah.
good times ahead for you. So, following on you from the lockdown, I seem to be doing all the questions tonight, Ro. I do apologise. But
You crack on. You're doing a very good job.
thanks. But now you've had the ease. I mean, we're coming out of lockdown with the restrictions being lifted. It's lovely seeing everyone, spread the love. No pun intended. How's it been over the last few months for yourself? How's it been coming out of that period?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure if you guys are aware, but I was back in the UK for a period of time during the UK lockdown. So I was very lucky that I got to be with family members. So,
Brilliant.
I got to experience for 10 months, the harsh reality of lockdown is what you guys are experiencing still. And to come back out here, people say, "Oh, how did you do quarantine? How did you manage with staying in a hotel for 2 weeks?" And I said, "Look, it's a breeze. I've got a normal life waiting for me at the other end of it. So it really wasn't that much of a challenge. So for me, the last few months have been fantastic. They've been great in the sense where I've been able to get back into that environment that I so much care for. The things that I so much that they mean to me. I've been able to do physical activity. I've been able to play football again. I've been able to catch up with people I hadn't for a long time, and to be able to see people who I care about. So it's a tricky one, because although I feel some guilt and some kind of emotional hold back from leaving my family again, and from leaving the UK, for me personally and for what I need, I've got everything here apart from that support, I guess. So yeah, it's been a lot better. It's been an improvement for me, and I think for me it's just a case of, like you said, you've seen the sun rising in the morning, and without making you guys too angry with me, we've had sunshine and it's been 35 degrees, and it's just
Ah,
it's just I'm incredibly lucky. I do count myself as just very, very lucky. And um yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's been a bit of a learning process over the last few months for me, because it's been a change of environment again. I've had to move places again. I've had to, 10 months is a long time, and I've had to kind of build and start up relationships again and finish a PhD. So it's been a challenging, but it's been also a very grateful experience for me.
It's it speaks of the ambition and just the proactive element to you, in that you identify these problems and you figure out solutions and how to take yourself far away from the problems and more towards the solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And just that sense as well of being able to get through the tough times, knowing that there is a really good thing at the other end. It's that sense of purpose and that sense of meaning, but also that sense of optimism that you, again, like Hal said, there's the metaphor just behind you. There is that optimism. There are brighter days ahead. You've got one right now.
right there.
Whereas maybe a few months ago you weren't able to see them so clearly. But I think as well as the isolation, that lack of choice that you've had at certain points in your life. So when the football was taken away from you, and when you weren't able to get home for your granddad, and really sorry to hear that as well.
Yeah.
Our condolences. But just that lack of choice can just be really stifling, and it can be really frustrating, because again, particularly for somebody who comes across as very proactive, when there is no solution, it sometimes leads to overwhelm, I'm imagining.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've had people come in and say to me, I didn't know you suffered with mental health. And I said, well, those are the times when I'm most proactive about protecting my mental health. It's about proactivity. And I think sometimes it can be quite mistaken. People can often say, I never deal with mental illness. I never deal. And I say to them, yeah, but what are you doing day to day? And I ask them, and they say, they're playing football, they're very sociable, they're eating well, they're sleeping well. And I just say, well, you're very proactive in actually in supporting your mental health. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't have or will never have mental illness. It just means you're very proactive in protecting it. And it's a great thing. If you can do that, then you're going to reduce that risk quite significantly. So yeah, you're right. I think for me, it's about being proactive. It's about taking responsibility when I know that I need something in my life, when I know that, I have to take responsibility, because it will only impact those close around me. So although, I have, very difficult conversations with mum, with dad, with Holly, with sisters Abby, and it's very difficult, because I think sometimes I don't want them to think that I'm leaving them and I don't care about my home environment. But I think what I always try to press is that for me, if I don't go and do these things, and if I don't support myself, and if I'm not responsible for my own mental health, then I'm only going to be quite a miserable and very low self state of mind, and quite an unpleasant person, quite resentful and I don't want to be that person. I have to take responsibility. I have to make these tough decisions to create an environment around me where I can be happy and I can thrive. And I think for me, that's kind of, whilst it's a tough decision, it's something which I've had to do. And yeah, it's still one I struggle with, because I feel like sometimes I have to justify these decisions, not to my family, but to other people and to people even here, to say, how could you do that? How could you move away from your family and your close support? How do you deal with it day to day? And the answer is I don't sometimes. I do generally struggle, but the balance away from that in terms of what else I get out here that necessarily I can't get in the UK is different. So it's really about it's a negotiation, I guess. It's about kind of weighing out what's good for me, what's not, and kind of taking responsibility from that.
But you are still with me, darling. You just live inside my head now. Frozen on the spot, circled in a knot, misplaced dominoes falling in a row. Grey outlines the void that has inhaled every ounce of joy. The walls and sky all painted too, as murky waters surround our cocoon. Goodbye. The lights have gone off and nobody's home. My body's moving, but my soul's so alone.
Yeah, and it sounds like a really difficult decision as well. It doesn't sound like you make these decisions lightly. You have to weigh up everything, and it must prey on your mind quite a little bit as well. What I was going to ask you as well with regards to the proactivity. So one of the worst things I think I've heard, and one of the worst things you can say to somebody who's in a really low state, is when you're giving them advice, you're saying suggesting activities they could try or changes they could make, but you precede it with the word just. So I used to hear just go for a walk, just exercise, just eat healthily, just get more sleep. And that word just is so damaging because it makes it all seem so easy.
Yeah.
and I mean, when we're in a good place, it is really easy to just get up and go for a walk. Fine. You don't even think twice. And it, particularly if you're in the routine, you just do it because that's what you always do. But to somebody in a really low place, that word just can be really damaging. And also you're telling somebody to just exercise when they struggle to get out of bed, when they struggle to even want to be alive. So I was wondering if you if you felt that way, but also how you push through that resistance that you might feel, how you push through that voice that tells you not to do the exercise that you know is good for you, and exercise.
Yeah, I think really to answer the first question in this idea of just, this terminology of just, it is incredibly frustrating. And it's something you don't really appreciate until you're in the position where somebody says it to you and you're feeling absolutely like rubbish. And yeah, it is for me, the emotion that comes up or the feeling that comes up is just pure frustration. And it makes me feel like I don't want to do that thing even more, because you don't feel understood. And you're right, the terminology that we use, and I'm sure you guys will know this more than anybody, but the terminology that we use with people who are struggling is just as important as what we actually are prescribing to them. So, we really do need to think about our communication with that. But in terms of pushing through and doing the things which are conducive for me, I think it's just a case of, again, taking responsibility and just knowing that if I don't, then I'm going to be on the bad end of it. And I think it's just that first initial 5 minutes, right? Like most people will say, it's the first initial 5 minutes, just really pushing through and trying to get there. But it's not easy. And for me, it might be different to somebody else, but And there's been times when I have stayed in bed. There's been times when I've stayed in bed all day when I should have been doing something which is more proactive and doing something which is great for me. But some days I don't. I give in. I say, do you know what? I can't today. And it's not necessarily a nice feeling at the end of the day, because you don't feel like you've achieved anything. But it's about getting up the next day and going again, looking at the next day. What can we do? What can we prepare for? And just trying to be as proactive as possible. And it does make it easier when you're prepared. And I often say to people, why do we wait until we're having a mental crisis to see a therapist? Why do we wait until we're having a real issue to see somebody or talk to somebody? We don't do that with a physical matter. We go to the gym to be healthy. We go to the gym to look better. We don't go to the gym when we're feeling sick. We go there, we're proactive to kind of prevent these things from happening. So why is it any different for mental illness? And I think for me, if I have the right tools in place from a therapist or from a counselor or from just speaking, then I'm much better well equipped to go and do those more proactive things when I don't want to do them. So I think, for me, seeing a therapist was like going to the gym, but for my mind. So, it was about setting a time of the week to go and see a therapist, even if it was for a week, and just preparing myself. I would go on days when I felt fantastic, and that was great because, I was in a space where I was taking that information in. And I think this is a problem. And I think people kind of think they have to see a therapist when things are wrong. And, they think, oh, I'm fine, well, great, you're fine. Fantastic. Even more reason to go and see a therapist, or even more reason to go and speak to somebody, because these are the times when you can really take the information in and be prepared to deal with a sort of a struggling situation. So yeah, it's something which I think I've learned over the years, and even whilst I'm in a better place at the moment, I'm proactively seeking a therapist to speak to, because what's to say something similar is not going to happen again in the future? What's to say if something triggers or something? We just don't know. We can't foresee these things in life. So why not go when you're feeling great? Why not go when you're feeling on top of the world? And there's no reason why we shouldn't, and we should be encouraging more people to do that. I think particularly men. We talked about men before there, about putting this mask on, kind of saying I'm fine. And particularly among men, I think there's this real stigmatism, and I think it's a real stigma, certainly in Australia, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit after, but it's a real kind of no-go is to open up and to talk about your mental health. And it's something which I've seen here being even more of an issue. And it's almost like we're behind time a little bit here, and we're kind of really hesitant to talk about the brain, talk about what's going on up here, as opposed to what's going on with our physical self. So I think men in particular, we need to encourage those people to train their minds just as much as they train their bodies. Yeah.
I think the worry from me is that because of lockdown, because of what we've been going through, I don't want it to be a buzzword, because that's what I'm seeing a lot coming through from reports and the National Policing Council and so on and so forth, and and you're reading these reports every day. You're taking out the key findings, and it's a no-brainer. Yes, young people will find it hard to struggle. Young people will find it hard to readjust after the already adjustments they've made in their lives. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We have to be more open. We have to understand that the mind gym needs to happen. The only concern for me is that I just don't want it to be a flash in the pan, because people are opening up a lot more, especially the social media influencers that are showing us the pictures behind behind the, what do you call it, the I don't know what the sepia
the brand.
filter. Yeah, behind the brand, behind the filter.
Yeah.
So it's lovely. It's lovely seeing that. The only concern I have, just mentioning it, as you rightly said there, George, is we have to focus more up here, and it can't be a buzzword, because it's a knee-jerk reaction. That's normally what it's more of a. It's not being proactive. It's being reactive, and I want that to revolve, and be more proactive, instead of just, oh, a knee-jerk reaction. Let's just do it because someone's told us to do it. Do it for yourself.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It was kind of part of the impetus for this podcast, was that we were frustrated with people saying we should do something about talking about suicide, and then they'd say that, and that was it. That was their bit done. So we wanted to do something, and I think it's good that vulnerability, vulnerability is seen as a positive thing here. Not 100% of the time, but it's definitely increasing. But it sounds like out in Australia, vulnerability is still seen as a negative when it comes from men in particular?
Yeah, it feels a little bit that way. And look, I've been here 4 years, and from my experiences, or at least in my little circles, I've found that is the case. And whilst I believe there are fantastic infrastructures here for mental health in Australia, in fact, Australia has some of the most leading research when it comes to exercise and mental health. It's a really, really good niche of research. But with regards to men and to open up and speaking up, I see it as a bit of a problem, something which we need to look at further, because you're right, in the UK, vulnerability is becoming a lot more accepted. It's becoming a lot more almost, we talk about this kind of idea of brand words and buzzwords. Sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's out there. It makes it a little bit more fashionable, if you like. It makes it, and sometimes we have to go with the trend. We have to go with the wave that's happening in our society at the moment. And sometimes just making it out there, making it more acceptable is obviously a great thing. And here it's almost, you mentioned the word, whether it's vulnerability, you mentioned the word suicide. It's kind of like people go into their shells a little bit. And they try, at least again from my experiences, it could be completely different for others, but it seems to be a buzzword that they don't want to talk about. It seems to be not a fashionable word, not something which is worth talking about. There's a very big masculine culture here in Australia. The man is the man. The man doesn't feel this kind of emotional need. The man doesn't feel vulnerable. The man protects. The man is, here to serve a purpose. And I think it's hard to see sometimes, because you see it. Having experienced mental illness myself to the point where I've had these suicidal idealizations. You start noticing it in other people, and you start realizing that something might be going on there, but there's such a mask and there's such a kind of a hidden prophecy, if you like, of these people that really just don't want to talk about it. We're in the position as what I was in maybe a few years ago, and just really are trying hard not to let it out. And so yeah, it's interesting, because living in two different places, you do see these kind of intricacies and differences for sure within mental health. Yeah.
And you mentioned your own suicidal ideation there as well. And is that something that's okay to talk about now for a little bit? So, when did you first experience the feeling that you didn't want to be here anymore?
Yeah, I think for me, so going back to the idea of obviously the football, being released from football, that was at an age of 14 and 15. I wouldn't say I felt or had any kind of suicidal idealizations then, but it was certainly the platform for where it was building. And I think for me, I always remember a time when I was trying to use education, as I say, as my way of compensating for these things. And I remember going in and doing a master's at the University of Bristol, feeling, like I was doing something to compensate these, as I thought, failures in my life. But at the same time, I remember wearing such a mask. I was going into the lectures, and I remember every single day, and this happened for maybe a good few months. And there's people who might see this podcast and think, blimey, I really didn't know this about George. But I was going into the toilets about 5 minutes before a lecture, bawling my eyes out in the cubicles, absolutely in states, having panic attacks. And this was a day-to-day thing. And I remember coming out, and I remember just wiping everything clear, looking at myself in the mirror, making sure nobody had any idea of what just happened, going into the lecture room, sitting next to my cohort of friends at the time, and just acting like nothing had happened. And I remember sitting there, not taking much in on those lectures, and just sitting there thinking, how does nobody know that I was just in there? And almost angry that nobody knew, almost angry that nobody was, aware of what was happening. And I think when you're talking about suicidal idealizations, I think I felt most of those things when I felt like I just simply had no way out. Nobody knew what was going on. I wasn't ready to open up about it. And it was just a sense of feeling trapped. And I think it was during those times when I first felt kind of suicidal. I started having these ideas and that it just wasn't worth it. What I was trying to achieve to compensate for my football, it just wasn't worth it. I wasn't going to get there. I'm always going to feel like this. Even in another capacity of education, I'm still going to feel like this. And I felt very, very trapped. I felt like I just simply had no other way out. And I was doing everything I could to hide it. but I was also hoping somebody would just reach out to me and say, "Are you okay?" And unfortunately, in the society we live in, we don't have that enough. Nobody asked me if I was okay. Nobody asked me, and there must have been signs. There must have been signs. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that's a naive thought to think, but I was bawling to a point where I was physically hurt. In these cubicles, my heart was hurting, my lungs were drained, and I was going into these lectures and almost out of breath. And this happened for a long time, and I just thought, this is a cycle I don't want to be in anymore. I don't want to hide this anymore. And yeah, it was a time in my life where I just didn't want to hide. I just thought I'd just rather not be here. And I think that was for me the biggest. I had a lot of relationship issues happening at the time with that as well, and it was too overwhelming for me. I think that being a key word is being overwhelmed and feeling like I just had no other way out. At that point, I didn't necessarily speak to anybody. I didn't have any support network in place. I didn't feel like I could open up even. And this is the scary thing. This is what really does scare me and scares me about other people, is that I have a absolutely unbelievable family who would literally do anything for me. I'm incredibly lucky for that. And, even from my extended family, incredibly lucky. Yet I didn't feel like I could even open up to them. And if I can feel like I can open up to those people who I feel most trustworthy of, how on earth are other people doing it when they're not so lucky to have a family network as I do? And that does scare me. That scares me, particularly among men. It scares me because I don't want to sound, misogynist there. Like, I don't want to sound like women deal with it as well, and women have just as bad issues. But for me as a man, I felt that quite a scary thing. I felt that as a real scary thing. Yeah.
And sometimes it can be the case where it's not out of a willingness to speak to them, and it's not about the family themselves. It can be because you love them so much that you don't want to burden them with your stuff. It's because you love them so much that you want to take yourself away from them. And that can be quite difficult to understand unless people have been through it. It sounds a bit like a paradox. Why would you want to be away from these people if you love them so much?
Yeah.
But if you know that you're loved to such an extent that any pain you feel will cause them pain, it becomes a lot easier to keep it to yourself. But then, because that level of overwhelm rises, it's a natural human reaction to want to escape an overwhelming situation.
Yeah.
If that overwhelming situation is your life, then surely it's an understandable reaction to want to escape life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's a huge part of it. And another thing was, I didn't want to come across as a failure again. I didn't want to feel, in my head, I felt like I've already failed once. I don't want to fail again. I don't want to go back home after, going home after a lecture and say, I can't do this no more. I didn't want to do that again. So I was fighting so much with myself, to try and be somebody who I thought everybody else wanted to see, that it was negating my own mental health. I was thinking, I've got to achieve somewhere else. I've got to, come on, like I can do this. I can do this. But at the same time, I was not letting people in. I was not exposing anybody to what I was dealing with at the time, because I didn't want to come across as another failure. So it was a bit of both. It was a case of course, I love my family so much, and I didn't want to burden them with the worry, but at the same time, I didn't also want to feel like a failure. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't achieving something where I've gone to another avenue of my life to go and achieve. So yeah, God knows how I got through that, but I did. And it was really after that where I kind of realized that I had to do something. Otherwise it was the end of the road. I just didn't want to be here. And I think for me, that's where these ideas about what do I need in my life came into play. What environment do I need? Not what other people think I need, but what do I need? And that's where I started to really have a good chat to myself. And that's, where these ideas came to go and travel and to go and, to see another part of the world. And thankfully, it's been a fantastic decision that I did make, because I do feel, whilst there's still issues here, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of times I've had to deal with mental illness out here, but I'm in a much better suited environment to deal with them, to cope with them. And that for me is a big thing. Yeah.
Al, you've got your big question coming up, but I'll just make a couple of quick points. Number one, George, I just want to give you a hug, by the way. That's the number one point. But the number 2 point is that I think for everybody that we've had on this podcast, and I'd include myself and Al here, is that we have all failed to some extent in what we wanted our lives to be like, in that they weren't perfect, in that we've all had to go through adversity. And I
Yeah.
think the way the way that I've looked at everybody that's been on this podcast, and again I'll include myself and Al, is that we've been through the adversity, and in no ways are we failures, because we are still trying, and we are trying to use the adversity to help another generation, to help people around us. And it's like the worst and best training you can ever go through. And I think particularly for you, George, if there's anybody listening who's been in a similar position where they've had a dream and they've had that dream taken away, or they're in the midst of trying to achieve their dream and then later on down the line it doesn't quite come off, who better to talk to than someone like yourself
Yeah.
who had the dream, who didn't reach the dream, but can now fully empathize with a young person going through that. So in essence, you may have failed in one regard, but you're a huge overachiever in the other regard, in that you
That
are perfectly positioned to help people. And I'm immensely grateful that you and everybody else on this podcast exists and is able to use their stories and to willingly listen to others as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I will mirror exactly what Roa said. I just want to know who did your hair, really, because it's at 6 o'clock in the morning. You're able to style it like that. It's great now.
It's
But
natural, mate. I wake up like this somehow. I have no idea how.
that's the footballer gene, isn't it? It's like, all right, yeah. But I think I think from just hearing that story, it resonates with me when I was at uni with the isolation, even to the point where I was doing the local student radio, Demon FM, and it got to a point where. There was too many egos there, too many students actually wanting to emulate and get on national radio. That was the dream, to be recognized by Scott Mills because he's coming to the the uni Wednesday night,
Yeah.
and all this. But you've made something. You've actually achieved more than what others will probably ever do, or and it's getting to that point of how do they get to that point, and you would be a great mentor for that. And
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah,
naturalized.
I think as well, you mentioned this sense of ego, this idea of ego, and it's a big thing. And again, particularly among men, and that's something which I realized that I had to work on. And it's not something you want to admit. Nobody wants to say they've got a big ego. Nobody wants to say, it's ego is the enemy. And I read this fantastic book, and I'm going to plug it here, but Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy, was a book that really did change a lot of my way of thinking.
Write it down, Ro. Write it down.
Yeah,
I'm writing
it's
it down. I'll put it in the episode description.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really fascinating and insightful book that opened my mind up to the sense of ego. And I've noticed that a lot of my decisions were based on ego. Now, whether or not those decisions, well, they've led to me to achieve fantastic things in my life. I noticed that a lot of my decision making were based around my ego. And the moment we can start to manage this ego and this almost this person inside of our head, this self-talk, is the moment we start making decisions for ourselves. And it's the moment we start actually serving ourselves to be happy and not to do things for expectations. And I think that for me was a big turning point in my life, because I realized I didn't necessarily need to achieve this certain thing for me to be happy. I didn't necessarily need to go and get whatever it might have been. All I needed was an environment which was conducive for me, and to every day to serve a purpose for me to be happy. And the ego can really, it's not a good thing. It's in some cases it can make you competitive. It can make you, or from a sporting capacity. But from a happiness perspective, it can take that away, and it can take it away quite quickly. It can be quite destructive, actually. So I think for me, that was part of the change, or part of the outlook of my thinking, that I really had to get a hot grip of, that I really had to manage. And yeah, that book was often people say reading is a fantastic resource to do, particularly when you're feeling these states of mind. But for me, it really was. It gave me the knowledge. It gave me the kind of the ideas of how I do that. So read. Knowledge really is power in these circumstances.
That'll be one of the
It's
hashtags,
funny.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, funny you mentioned ego in a sporting sense as well, because I
Yeah.
feel like I'm quite an understated guy here. I'm in a wooden shack. There's not too much going on around me. But when I play football, I wear gold AstroTurf trainers. I wear predominantly purple. I'm quite a flair player, temperamental. I rarely track back. I can't be bothered. I'm not interested in the man. I'm interested in the ball. That's where my ego comes out. That's all of my ego. An hour and a half a week, and then the rest of the time
Typical
the ego stays
Chelsea.
in check. Hopefully, absolutely.
Typical
But Al,
Chelsea.
you've got a very big
Yeah.
question.
Yes, the worst question that you're going to ask anyone. It's just literally grown from episode 1, but this is it, George. All right, the last question of the night, and it's a doozy. But and it actually probably is quite an important question to ask, because it's all about your younger self. So you're in your TARDIS, you want to go back in time. You're going to talk to yourself at 14, at that moment, when you'll be in, at that moment when you're at the academy. What would you say to yourself, aged now, to your younger self, if you could have that opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great big question, actually.
It's an awful question. It really is.
It's a wonderful question.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is something which I've actually tried to play around with within my own intervention, if you like, is I've always pictured this, not necessarily 14, but this younger George.
Yeah.
I've actually got a picture. It sounds really sad, but I've got a picture of a younger George, and it's something which I refer to a lot. And when I'm feeling, when I'm having a really difficult time, or when I'm struggling to cope with my anxiety, my depression, I'll get this picture out, and I'll look at this picture, and I think, what would you tell this boy now, this innocent, this boy who knows nothing more than just to try and be happy, to have fun? What would you tell this boy? And it's a really, and I've still, even to this day, I struggle to answer that question. I just look at myself and I catch myself just gazing at this picture. I'm thinking, what would you say? What would you say? But I think for me, particularly around the ages of 14, it would be to, and it sounds such a kind of a cliche, isn't it? But it would be to be brave. I think and that is such a cliche thing to say, it's to be brave, but it's to have the openness to want to speak. And whoever that person is, you can think, oh, it shouldn't be that person because they might tell this person, or it shouldn't be my teacher because they might tell the headmaster, it shouldn't be my friend because they might tell my other friend. But the moment that you do, just even if you say a sentence, or if you let some vulnerability out, is the moment your mental state will change. And for me, I think what I would tell that person is just to say something, just to say a sentence. You haven't got to explain your whole life story. You haven't got to explain why you're feeling that way. All you have to say is, I am struggling. All you have to say is, I need a little bit of support. And it's not an easy thing to do. And it's not something which is, I can just cuff off this advice and it's something which you can go away and do. It takes time, it takes practice, but just give someone an indication, because when somebody else knows of what's going on, then that person, that problem, it does feel like that weight has been lifted. So I think for me, it's just about knowing that the risk of not saying something far outweighs the risk of not, of actually, if you say something and it being a lighter load. So it sounds I apologize, it sounds a very cliche answer.
No apologies needed, no shame.
And no shame. I think for me it would be that, but to not worry too much about who that person is, because the moment as well you start talking about it, is you're not necessarily talking for the other person. It's a way of just releasing it off your own self, and just, it's almost like the moment you voice something, it feels lighter. Your brain and your mindset starts to just unload with these things. So yeah, I think it would be that. But I think the only other thing, and probably if not of equal importance, is to look at your mental health as a holistic entity. So look at mental health not just as something which physical activity is going to fix. Don't look at mental health as if nutrition is going to fix, or sleep, or talking to someone is going to fix, or medication. It really does take an integrated approach. It really does take lots of different pieces of the pie to ensure that your environment is the best it can be. And I think that is something which I would tell my younger self, is don't think you need to go and complete a PhD in something and expect that is going to solve all your problems. No, it won't. It's just going to compensate. It's just going to kick the can down the road. You need to make sure that everything is right in your life, or at least as well as it can be. And for me, it's about your environment. It's about your physical environment, your social environment, your spiritual environment, whatever it might be. it has to be holistic. It has to be integrated. It's really is a no one solution will fix all. It will be a case of receiving support from different avenues in your life. And for me, that would be something I would press home on my younger self, just to make sure it's not just about compensating for one thing. Yeah.
Wow. What an answer.
I really like the concept
that was a beautiful answer.
I really like the concept of being brave by being vulnerable. Again, it
Yeah.
sounds like a paradox, but actually there's so much strength in not running from your vulnerability, and just putting it all out on the table. There's so much strength in telling somebody that you're struggling. It doesn't make you any weaker, it makes you stronger to do that. And I'm very into the idea of the photograph as well. I recommend that to a lot of people. If you find it hard to talk to yourself in a positive way, think about how you would talk to this little 6-year-old or this 10-year-old or this 14-year-old, because we're still the kids that we once were. And anything that you would say to that kid can be said to yourself as well. So yeah, I would like to hear more from you, George. Where can I find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can
plug away.
So I'm currently in the process here of kind of creating my own business. It's a really exciting time for me. So currently my hashtag is Coach George Thomas. And I'm really looking at building an online health consultancy where I can support people's mindset through physical activity, through healthy lifestyle behaviors, nutrition, sleeping behaviors, and just all different types of health enhancing behaviors. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And please, anybody watching this, feel free to contact me when and where and if you like. You know, I'm more than happy to be there for anybody. And if this podcast or if my kind of experiences can help just one person, then honestly, my job here is done. And you know, this was part of the reason why I've come onto this podcast today, is just to be able to talk about and to feel like somebody has got someone who can have something in common with. And you mentioned before, it might be somebody who has failed in one part of their life and doesn't really know where to go from here. And as I say, if I can be that one person who somebody can come to, then please do feel free to get in touch.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And I think I'd like to add before we finish as well, that just because we fail, it doesn't make us failures. We just fail because we're human. But thank you so much, George, for coming on and for waking up early for this. And now you have the whole day ahead of you. So
yeah, that's it. No,
enjoy it.
It's a pleasure.
It's really bright out there. It's like, it's lovely. I mean, it's lovely.
You know what? Again, sometimes in this sort of time of the day as well, 7 o'clock in the morning, you'll see a kangaroo just bouncing around the campus here, and I'm like, sometimes I've got to pinch myself and think, a kangaroo, really? And yeah, so I'll probably go and meet some new mates in a minute. Go and see if I can find any.
For anybody who's never been to Britain, this is what it's like 24/7. Just dark, just nothing.
With a hint of melancholy.
No kangaroos. Sometimes, George, I look out my window and I see an old carrier bag being drifted along in the wind. So it's not quite a kangaroo, but it's what we have. Sometimes a bit of tissue just sticking out of it. What's on there? Too late. Don't look.
You're right, mate. You're absolutely right. Look, there's no place like home. Don't forget that.
That's true. Well, thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
We stop the recording and then we carry on talking for a little bit. Feel no shame after hours. Just as a bit of a debrief. So we'll say goodbye and then we won't go.
Yeah. The extras.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Feel no shame.
Feel no shame.
Thank you, George. Very nice to meet him. What a lovely guy. Easy on the eye too, which is good on the video version of this podcast. Not so much on the audio version of the podcast, which I think this outro features on. So go and check out the YouTube video if you want to see what George looks like, but also to see the sun streaming through his window in a non-boastful way as he sits in Australia whilst we sit in England, which doesn't really compare, I don't think. But seriously, thank you very much. It was very nice to hear from George and for him to speak so openly and frankly about his struggles, particularly when his football dream got cruelly taken away from him at such a young age, but how he came back from that and how he used exercise, sport, physical activity to his advantage and to help him through those really dark times. So George can be found on Instagram at GeorgeThomas_92, or at Coach George Thomas. Check him out, he's got some good stuff on there, and he did mention some new projects that he's going to be starting up, so I'm sure there'll be some information on there too in the coming days or weeks or months. And the book that he mentioned was Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, and we can personally recommend Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, and anything that she does on paper in books, but also her TED Talks. She works a lot with shame and vulnerability. Definitely recommended. And as George said in the podcast, read, and then read some more. Thank you, as always, to Therapoet for the Dark Interlude, and to Sport in Mind. So Therapoet can be found on @Therapoet, and Sport in Mind @Sport in Mind, for all the great work that they do, and for the lovely bottle that they sent. Music is by Adobe, and we've got some new music at the start, and playing underneath this, I'll go quiet for a couple of seconds. It's by Dean Gaylard, who was on episode 4. Until next time, which will be the last episode, maybe ever, maybe just for this series. Until then, feel no shame, have a nice time, stay safe, and listen again.